This meeting is now being recorded.
Good morning and welcome to the third in the spring webinar series at Powwownow. My name is Andrew Armour and I'm your host for this morning's webinar, which is called Business Yoga, Why Smarter Businesses Use More Flexible Working. This is the third in our series this spring. The previous webinars that we have undertaken, the first was about smart meetings, and it was entitled Decline, Why It's Smart to Ditch Dumb Meetings. Last week we heard from David Gertin about why the good share but the great collaborate, and today is all about how smarter businesses use more flexible working practices. Just a brief introduction to our team today, as well as myself. I'm joined today by Robert Gorby, John Bull, Stewart, Millard and Jeff Hammond from the Powwownow team. And I'm delighted to say we've got Duncan Thomas from Pomegranate Group, who will introduce you to you shortly. Just in terms of our administration today, we will be winding up this webinar at around about 11 o'clock. But we do want your input and feedback today, and we'll be introducing that shortly. This morning is all about smarter, flexible working. How can you manage a project team when you're not with them? Is flexible remote working right for every organisation? What do you need to do to work more remotely and flexibly? And can technology help you to do so? First of all, I'd like to introduce you to my colleague John. John is going to be monitoring the questions from our guests today and also running a poll. Morning, John. What's our poll question today?
Good morning. Yeah, there's a couple of ways we'd like to you to interact with us today, exactly the same as previous webinars we've done. The first is a poll. We are firing out, can I manage my team just as well without being in the office most of the time? It's a simple yes or no answer. If you could fill it out for us, we'll ask our guests at the end of the webinar and get their feedback on it. The second way is at the top of the screen, you will see a Q&A option. If you ask us any questions, again, we'll fire them out to the guests here.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. We'll hear from you later on today. First of all, I'm going to share with you a very brief presentation about this topic of remote and flexible working. It is a big topic, so we're just giving a quick look at it this morning, and then we're going to be asking my guests here today their thoughts on this. Firstly, why is it becoming such a hot topic in modern management and modern businesses? We looked at this last week. And this is the fact that business has always been about connecting to people. This is a picture of an old coffee shop in England, in London, in the 18th century. As we discussed last week, the original Lloyd's Insurance and the original stock exchange both started as tea and coffee shops. And the reason is that was the way you connected to people. Obviously, I'm here today at Powwownow. There's a lot more sophisticated ways we can connect to people nowadays, but the essence is still the same, and that we need to connect to people. There was this great line by the business writer Stefan Lindegaard: if you can't even share your ideas across the business, how can you expect to share them outside? Anyone involved in sales, marketing, public relations knows you have to be joined up inside the business before you start talking to people outside of it. And this came from one of our earlier webinars this year. There's an acknowledgement that we all need to work effectively and collaboratively with other people across our organisations. This is a kind of flexible working, but it's not the kind of flexible working that we'll be talking about today. But at least she is connecting using smart technology. The kind of flexible working that we are talking about probably looks more like this. It involves communicating while you're commuting. It involves meeting clients and suppliers, perhaps in cafes and hotels. It involves networking to people across the office. It may involve people returning from maternity leave. And it may involve working from a whole range of clubs, associations and organisations. And it may involve working with in a customer or supplier office, as we see at the bottom right there. First of all, let's just get clear on what we mean by these topics. This is a definition from the Chartered Institute of Personal Development. The term flexible working describes a type of working arrangement which gives some degree of flexibility on how long, where and when employees work. The flexibility can be in terms of working time, but this is where it gets very interesting, I think, also in terms of location and the pattern, the way in which you work, and we'll be talking about this shortly. There's various ways in which this can be seen, it is not just working from home, although working from home is a very big part of it. It's also things such as part-time working, shared working, teleworking, where someone works permanently from home, career breaks, where you may take a break from career, come back and go in again. Compressed hours is a very interesting topic. Essentially, especially in the high-tech environments, very intense work, perhaps working in the evening and then having a few days off. And term time working, especially as the education sector becomes so big, people working around term time. The Royal Society of Arts, Manufacturers and Commerce conducted an interesting report last year called the Flex Factor, which looked at the value of flexible working in the UK. And this is just a brief summary of the main things that they looked at. Why is remote working becoming such a hot topic? Well, there's three main things. The fourth one relates to the third one. Cost savings and productivity, work-life balance and happiness. And it's a very interesting point because initially you think it's about that sort of work-life balance, but there's some real hard commercial reasons as to why companies are doing this. It's also interesting to see who is working in this way at the moment. It's interesting that over 70%, 77% are already working in some kind of flexible working, mainly being able to work at home, perhaps one day a week or something like that. What is interesting is that 50% actually have formal, flexible work environments. In other words, it's part of your employment contract, it's part of your deal with the company. It may well be part of the reason why you took the job in the first place, in that you can get that work-life balance. Some research was also undertaken by Powwownow last year with over 1,000 UK businesses. And they asked managers, what do you think are the key benefits of remote working? And it's quite interesting again to see the similarities of the RSA research. 39% of managers said it's good to be able to work from anywhere. You can work from your supplier or your client. 45%, and this is an interesting one, we'll talk to one of our guests this morning about this, is you can employ the best talent. They don't have to be within 10 or 15 miles of commuting distance. You can employ great, smart talent from across the UK or even across the world. But here's the interesting number on the right-hand side of the screen there, 56%, it is about reducing costs and overheads, reducing the heavy expense often associated with having a large office, large team, etc. Now, this whole area of remote and flexible working is not everyone's cup of tea. There is some interesting news that came out last year, which some of you may have heard of. This is a lady called Marissa Mayer. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Yahoo, one of the biggest companies in the world. They actually decided to cut back on allowing people being able to work from home. It's quite a controversial move, bearing in mind so many people nowadays want to work in this way. So I'm going to raise this as an issue that we can be discussed today. The reason why Marissa did this is she was trying to build, she thought that not being in the office prevented the kind of collaboration and social contact that she was after. Also, some people believe there's too much work intensity if you are working from home and working on the train, etc. And this was raised by the RSA as well, is can remote working actually become a problem, not just a solution to working better? This is the quote that Marissa Mayer made, I think in Post in April last year. And she said, to become an absolute best place to work, communication and collaboration will be important, so we need to be working side by side. That is why it is critical we're all present in the office. So again, this is not from the 1980s, this is from 2013. It was a controversial move, very high-tech company, but I think it's worth kicking off our debate with some of these points today. And so at this point, I'd like to introduce Robert Gorby, Marketing Director of Powwownow. Obviously, interesting, Robert, because obviously you have a young family, you have a fairly decent commute, but you're also obviously an expert in the technology and how this is impacting on the workplace. The first question we have for you this morning is, well, where do you work, Rob, and does it matter where you work?
Yeah, hi Andrew. Yeah, some interesting quotes there, particularly from Yahoo. But effectively, I've got a number of different places that I work from. As you mentioned, I've got a commute to the office, which is about an hour and a half. So I've three different places I tend to work from. I tend to spend time in the office. I can work from home on certain days, and then I also work from what I call my third places. Now they could be hotel foyers, they could be cafes, and really where I work depends on what I need to do. that particular day. So, for example, if I'm working from home, it tends to be because I want my head down. I want fewer interruptions. For example, I need to focus on some planning or focus on cracking through some specific work. When I'm out in my, say cafes or hotel foyers, that tends to be when I'm meeting with people or even meeting with agencies or suppliers or contacts. You go and meet them in convenient locations. And then come into the office, obviously, spend time with the team and, to progress with the, projects with team members. So I spread my time between three different work locations.
And is that part of your discipline? Do you consciously decide where you're going to work each week?
No, that can change. I mean, it really can. It can change from one day to the next. Things crop up, and I think that's the beauty of having a flexible culture. So it's not just about the location, but that culture of actually, do you know what? Tomorrow I really do want to work from home, or I need to go into London for a meeting, and instead of coming back out of London, I'm just going to stay there and I'm going to find a cafe with Wi-Fi and work there for the rest of the day. So I think it's the ability to be flexible.
Okay, I'm going to open up this discussion a little bit further. I'm going to introduce another colleague from Powwownow, Stewart Millard. Stewart, I want to see, are you seeing companies actually plan for this? And what are the sort of technical issues that they need to sort of consider before they get into this kind of way of working?
Yeah, I mean, it's really depending on where they're coming from. A lot of it is actually that there is not as much planning as people perhaps think there is, because with the invention of iPads and things like that and laptops, and people are working more flexibly, you're seeing software solutions especially, that are being used just by downloading or joining through a web page, and then you're immediately on a conference, or you're on a collaborative working session with your colleagues, whether they're home-based or office-based. So you're seeing a lot of companies look at that. There are certain aspects that people need to be aware of, more around firewalls, which tend to be more exact for the organisation element rather than people working from home, because they're on their own network. Usually they haven't got a firewall that's going to cut everything off, and they can usually join, video sessions or web sessions like we're doing today that are really easy to join. So
who is it? Does it tend to be in those enterprise organisations? Is it an IT solution, or is it senior executives who say we want to work better?
It can come from either. I think usually you might find that head of a company says we need to actually improve the way we're working and improve communications, which will then dictate down, say, right, IT manager, go away and find a solution. And they can come to us, and obviously we do that. Or you might find actually from within, like a sales manager says, I've got all my people out on the road. I need to actually work out where they're going to be, or actually see them, because they're all over the country, either working verticals in Scotland or South Coast or whatever. You need them to be able to communicate effectively, and invariably you can just join in a cafe through video or something like that.
Exactly, as Rob was talking about earlier. At this point, I would like to welcome our third guest this morning. Delighted to say and welcome our guest is Duncan Thomas from Pomegranate Group. Duncan runs a very successful digital agency that is based just outside the City of London in Clerkenwell. The agency runs a lot of very sophisticated, fairly technical digital media solutions for companies such as Lloyds, Nokia, Jacks of London. So welcome, Duncan. How are you?
Hi, very good, thank you.
Duncan, the interesting thing about you, as well as the fact that you run an agency, that your agency is based just outside the City of London, but you personally are based in the West Country, and a lot of your technical development is based in Bath, I believe.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because it's a very high-tech, very intensive environment you work in. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about how that came about, and how on earth can you run a very creative business with specialists when you're so far away and not in the office with them? How did it come about, and how did you do it?
I'd love to say it was planned, very strategically, but it wasn't. It was quite organic. It came about really because we didn't want to lose a key member of staff. Our technical director decided it was time for a change of life, and so he moved down to Bath, and due to that we sort of had to start looking at different ways that we could still keep the teams together. So that was a big start of it all. And then in addition to that, I think we started looking at cost efficiencies as well. So how could we keep a core London address, which was important for a number of our clients, but introduce cost efficiencies from actually having less London waiting and looking at different types of staff that we could get from different areas of the country. And also now, actually, we look at quite a lot of international remote working as well. So that was a big part of it. I think the change that's come about is actually it's a difference in our discipline. So we probably, to be honest, have more meetings, but they're a lot more focused, and they have a sort of a much tighter agenda. And that's been the difference. I think we did used to, as you talked about in the previous webinar, we did used to have a lot of these dumb meetings, and they would spend hours, and when we're all sat around in person, we could, end up getting distracted quite easily. But now I think we've got this renewed discipline, which I think is quite surprising.
And what about you personally? Because you, how often are you in London? How do you split your time from working remotely and working actually in the office?
So I'm typically in London about 3 days a week, 2 days down from home, and I've got about 2.5 hour commute down and back.
Do you work on the train as well?
I do try, yeah. Unfortunately, I'm on South West train, so I don't have a good Wi-Fi connection or any of that jazz.
Right.
So I can now figure between which hills that I can get reception and when I can make a call.
Okay. It leads on to the second question, Duncan, and that is, you touched a little bit on this about how you manage your team. And obviously, it's quite a serious business you're in, although we're highly creative. There's quite serious technology involved in, presumably a lot of project management, a lot of technical development work. Has that changed how you work with your team? I'm thinking of lean and agile type processes and waterfall type planning. How do you plan those projects when you're not in the office with them? And do you also, the second part of that, do you allow the same flexibility across the team? Are they allowed to work everywhere they want as well, or anywhere they want, flexibly and stuff?
Yeah, okay, so first question, how do we plan? It is about actually putting a structure. We've used a lot more probably technology and platforms in managing studio time, managing people, and our project management. So obviously a lot more cloud-based stuff, so everyone has better visibility and can log in and see what's happening. We also have much tighter weekly planning sessions that we kick off the weeks with.
And is that face-to-face, that meeting?
No, that's still remote, because we don't bring everybody together for that, so we're still doing it. It's a remote collaborative session. So we have our London teams will be online to the Bristol team or the Bath team. So
do you run those meetings, or does your production manager chair them? Or?
I am involved, but actually normally leave it to the lead of the project manager, our project director, who does that. And I think that's another key part about it all. Actually, is that what's changed is the types of people we are employing and how we've actually changed our structure about empowering people and giving more responsibility into the roles. And I think that was a big learning curve for me actually about this remote working, because I didn't realise how micromanaging we were as an organisation. Suddenly this remote working has really opened up our need to empower more people, and how some people have come to the front. And that's, again, what's changed about our sort of planning structure.
Well, this was mentioned in our webinar last week about what we call leadership conversation. If you're going to have this kind of collaborative environment, the people have got to do it. They've got to become leaders of their own thing and manage themselves really well.
Yeah, and I think that's also changed actually our recruitment strategy. We now look for certain criteria in people. Are they going to be self-disciplined, much more intuitive? And that's, before we'd be quite happy to have sort of spoon-fed people who do certain role types, but now we need people who are going to be able to step up and be able to sort of work independently in remote environments. And to be honest, once we've sort of proven that part, we have a development path, and then we actually open up the flexibility, as you said, to everybody to be able to do their remote working. But it's a discipline that we have to ensure is there first.
And they have to be very comfortable with the technology, conference calls, video calls. That's part of what they do.
Exactly.
Okay. On that point about I want to bring Robert and Stewart back into this, and essentially look at this. The smart technology itself. Obviously, it's an industry that you're very much involved in. How do you think the technology is best used to enable flexible working?
Yeah, I mean, I think what was really interesting in what Duncan just said there is this idea of empowered employees and how flexible working is almost like driving people to become, step up to the plate and to become more visible, to become more empowered. And I think that's an important thing for when you're considering flexible working. The danger of not being in the office is you become an email trail. You have behind email, and people see you as an email trail, and that's it. They don't hear from you, they don't see you, you're not in a video call. So I think that's the first thing, is to make sure people have got the technology in place to be more than just that email trail. We're seeing a massive growth in the solutions that we provide on video calling, on screen sharing, conference calling, and there's technologies out there to enable you to work remotely when having the same experience as if you were in a room with somebody, because in a room you see them, you want to show your laptop or a presentation, you can do that remotely. I think what's really important though, when you look at technology can trip people up. And we've got a principle here of one-click collaboration. So how do we make things one-click simple for people? Because there's, not everybody is as advanced as others in technology. There's quite a few technophobes out there, and it's really important that, if you are an IT director, if you are a team leader, that you're choosing solutions, or even a user yourself, you choose solutions that are going to be one-click simple, because you don't want the frustrations.
Looking at that one, Stuart, I mean, did the companies, when they embed this new technology, does it take a lot of work, or to get people to use the technology well?
It's all about adoption, really, and it has to be adoption from the top. So, because you can have like anyone within a company that says, PA suddenly says, I'm going to use this, and if they send an email out to everyone that says, let's all use this, people are either going to ignore it or delete it, right? Yeah. If you get a CEO of a company or IT director, someone that's going to say, someone says jump, they say hi. It's going to be, send that out from them, get them to get that adoption across and say this is why, in clear, concise communication with their employees, are saying this is why we're going this way, this is how we're going to achieve these either sales figures next year, or we're going to grow by 20%, or whatever it might be. It's basically saying this is one step on the leg of their journey.
I mean, is the technology becoming easier to use? Is it becoming more user-friendly?
Yes, I feel so. I mean, even with some of the steps that we're taking in the next few months, we've got some exciting things happening with our solutions that should make them a lot easier to use, as Rob said, with the one-click kind of connection. And especially where the technology is going with video and things like that, things are becoming very, very simple for people to just join through their web page, for instance, their web browser, in they go, and you're on a call or a video call or a web conference.
Brilliant. Just on, we just go back on some of the points that were made in that research from the RSA, and also the news, the comment about Yahoo. There is this point I wanted to raise with all three of you today, really, and that is, if we have this remote and flexible working, I came in on the train today, you see people working on the train at 6:30 in the morning and 8 o'clock at night, tapping away. You see people working at the kitchen table, and they should be talking to their wives and kids and husbands and things. So, is there a danger that there's a danger it's very hard to switch off? And I'm thinking of work-life balance, that the remote technology should make it easier, but is it hard to switch off?
Yeah, I think the interesting one is the family part. I think you're right, especially when I'm working from home. But actually, interesting enough, what it enables me to do, whereas before I'd work through, I'd do a 9 till 7 or something, but now actually I do take a break. If the kids are home, let's say, particularly half terms and things, I'll take a break at lunchtime, knowing full well that I can actually continue on in the evening. And I think actually this technology has given more fluidity to the day, to be honest. I don't feel the guilt factors anymore.
Okay.
That's a really interesting point, actually. That sort of fluidity and the ability to sort of take breaks. I think it is important. If you do promise things to kids, they never forget them. You've got to make sure that you do switch off at 6 o'clock because you need an hour with them or whatever. But I think the benefit is, that you can then, maybe not ideal for some people. It doesn't work for everybody, but I'd rather switch off for a couple of hours, 6 to 8, kids to bed, and then if you need to catch up afterwards, then you have the technology that you can do that. So like I say, it doesn't work for everybody, but
what are your thoughts on the?
I think it really depends on I think from an employer point of view, they've got to understand, or the employees have got to understand, that there is that flexibility and there has to be that communication between it. Because, if a manager says, well, you can work flexibly and work till 9, then they should feel that those are areas there. If you're then constrained to 9 to 5, and someone says, well, they're sending emails at 8 o'clock and you can't then talk to them, you're going to get that miscommunication.
True.
So I think it has to be across the board. But also, if you talk about Europe, you've only got to look at Spain. They have a siesta in the afternoon. They don't work between those hours. Therefore, they're going to be working later. So it makes sense to work flexibly, especially talking about global companies and working globally.
I think it's important, because Duncan, you work in different time zones and things, don't you?
Yeah.
So that's where remote working becomes very handy, I suppose.
Yeah, it does. I think we have got a little US team. I think that's crucial. We've got Australian clients. We're working with dev teams in sort of China and Russia. I think it becomes really, it's crucial having the time zones. Although I think I've probably been one of those ones who's sending the emails and trying to put a conference call about 9 o'clock at night, forgetting my time zones, and suddenly having a project manager ask me, is she allowed to have a social time or not?
Well, on that point, we're in the final lap of this webinar today. I'm just going to ask, I'll include Stewart in this as well. What would you recommend for keeping a strong team culture? Just brief sort of 2 or 3 main tips. I'll start with you, Rob. What would you recommend for, if you're going to be working like this, what would be your advice to people in terms of making sure you keep that strong culture?
Yeah, I think first of all, make the most of face-to-face time. When you do a face-to-face time, it's, make the most of it. Do spend time, grab a lunch with people, go out for a coffee. Don't just, stay at your desk hidden behind a PC or whatever. So I think, when you are in the office with people, spend time with them, develop those relationships. The relationships are really important. That, and so I think that'll be my kind of top tip, that make the most of that face-to-face time so that you can then benefit remotely.
Duncan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd agree totally, actually. Face-to-face time becomes even more important. I think it's also having an understanding of, if you're going to do a lot of this remote use of technology, this understanding that it's not news at 10, that you actually have to still keep it as a fluid conversation, and your whole approach to actually how an attitude. You've sort of got a bit of learning how to use the technology to get the best out of it, I think.
Brilliant. Stewart, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd agree with Duncan. It is about keeping. You've got to treat it like you're actually in the room, even if you're not.
Yeah.
And because otherwise it becomes very dictatorial, kind of, right, I'm going to just talk to you and you're going to listen and then see a response. I mean, we still get a lot of people that see videos like, I just want to see the whites of their eyes kind of attitude, which I think is okay for certain managers if that's what works, but I think for generally it's about working collaboratively and trying to get over some of these barriers of saying it's just a very formal thing. It should be used as like, oh, we need a chat, click, done, we're on.
Which is that one-click natural thing that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, we're in just the final stage. I'd like to bring back John. John has been looking at the poll and some questions. The poll question was yes, no, I could manage my team just as well by not being in the office most of the time. John, what are the results looking like?
Yep, the majority of people have answered that question, and 75% have said yes, and 25% have said no.
Ooh, that's quite high. I'm surprised. Rob?
No, I mean, we're seeing the trend. It's good to see it that high, maybe a little higher than I expected, but I think that's what we're seeing now, that that move to flexible working and things like that. So yeah, I'd agree. I think that's
Do you think that number also reflects how you would work, but it's a high number, isn't it? 70%.
It is high. I wasn't expecting to be high. I was expecting more 50-50 balance, but yeah, it's good to see.
And what about questions, John? What questions have we got?
Yep, so if you missed it at the beginning, we have a Q&A option at the top of the screen. If you want to ask us any questions, simply write it down there and we'll fire it out. So the first question that came in earlier was, how do I know if someone is actually working from home?
and not just at the pub and having a break.
Spending their day in the kitchen.
Duncan, you've got a lot of creative people in your organisation. How do you know they're all working?
Because we've got webcams in everybody's homes. No, because, well, again, it's part of the change of the dynamics, but it's about trying to set these goal-driven objectives. And because, like I say, we have this project and team management tool, so everybody still is logging time, is logging their goals. They've still got sort of deadlines to achieve, so it's a little bit more open.
Okay. Rob, do you think it's a good point? How do you know people are working if they're at home?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's all this idea of you don't judge people on how they do something, what they're doing. It's more the outputs, and I prefer to look at everybody is their own leader of their own area, and they've got clear goals, and if that means they can do that more efficiently and take a little bit of a longer time to do something where they need to, then that's fine.
We've had a question come in from Ricky Neal, who has asked, do you think that it's essential to trust employees before offering flexible working?
Probably say.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was going to make a point on that last question anyway. That I think from most people's point of view, whether you're employer or employee, I think there has to be a bit of trust there. Because even on conference calls, you always hear the story, someone's making a cup of tea or not listening to what's going on in that meeting. And I think actually adding the visual element, it sounds silly, but if you're on camera, people can see you. They know that you're either paying attention. You can see when someone's actually going to answer a question. You see on their face, like, I don't quite understand that before they've asked.
We've talked about that before. The video calls are more engaging, more involved.
But it's sort of just all about that. But I think there has to be trust, because you can't just. Otherwise, you're micromanaging, and you might as well say everyone back in the office.
Yeah.
Questions, John?
We've had a couple of questions about the Yahoo point you raised earlier, actually. So why did companies like Yahoo dismiss remote work?
I mean, very, very interesting. I think I think the reason why Yahoo got such publicity around that is because they went against the grain, in such a major way, and I think that's probably overemphasized the publicity they got around it, if I'm honest. And I also believe that maybe they are just looking for ways of doing something differently to try and re-energize employees. I think there's always place for face-to-face time and a time to be in the office, but I don't think that's the sort of trend, and I do believe that the publicity was because it was so against the grain.
Do you think it was, from your marketing background, would you, a cynical person might say, was it just all for publicity?
Good question. I'm not sure. I couldn't answer that, Stewart, at all. But I think we're not seeing that trend generally, and so I'm not sure how long that will last. Because actually, I think it's that trust idea needs to be built within Yahoo.
Okay. And how does a manager manage properly if there's no one there?
That's an interesting point. So, in terms of there's no one in the office, or
it's a question that came in. I assume it's if you're not actually seeing people face to face.
Right.
How you can manage them properly.
Well, Duncan, I suppose that reflects the point you were saying. It's about them being self-managed and having good, clear objectives.
Yeah, good structure to understanding what their objectives are over time period. I was talking about the goals. What are they got to deliver? It is about self-discipline, and it's also about an ambition, that they want to achieve and strive to achieve as well. I think so. There is a lot in terms of the trust.
Brilliant. Okay. That brings to a close just a final few points. Thank you for taking part today. What have we sort of talked about? Well, why is it that smarter businesses are using more flexible working? Key thing is productivity, and as Duncan mentioned, getting rid of poor meetings, less commuting time. Flexible and remote working makes it easier to attract talent. We heard from Duncan talking about how when his top tech resource relocated, he kept them by using the remote tools and things. Businesses can save valuable cash by reducing on office expenses. You can embrace new technology to improve communications and project management, exactly as Duncan and Rob were talking about. That brings to an end the spring webinar series at Powwownow, which we started a few weeks ago. You can view the entire series online. And there are more Powwownow events on their way. Finally, remember, not everyone, when you are working at home, thinks you work in the same way. You may think that you live in a very stylish executive office working from home. Some people may think you're on the beach. Some people may think you're slumped with a couple of bottles of beer. So be careful when you work from home. Different people have different perceptions. I'd like to thank our team today. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining the webinar series from Powwownow. I hope you all have a great day, and thanks for joining us. Goodbye.